We are going to be doing Brachos, Daf Samach, top 10 teachings on the 60th Daf of Brachos. Number one is going to be about Koach or Kocha de Hetera Adif. The strength of the lenient opinion is more important to be listed. Number two is fear and anxiety versus faith in God. Number three is the concept of al tiftach peh l'satan. Don't open your mouth to the Satan. Number four is it really better to just pray to God than use a doctor, or is that foolishness and you should use a doctor? Number five is the prayer Asher Yatzar, the prayer of God creating us with wisdom and allowing a person to be able to relieve themselves and the amazing body that allows for that to happen that God created. Number six is the Shema we say in the evening by the bed. Number seven is the prayer Elokai Neshama Shnasat, to be the soul that you put into me is pure. Number eight are the brachos, the blessings we make in the morning to thank God for clothing and shoes and belts and so on. Number nine is the brachot or bracha, the blessing or blessings we make on the hand and head tefillin. And number 10 is accepting bad things with joy. And the story of Rabbi Akiva and whatever God does is called the Avrachman al-Tava, but whatever God does is ultimately going to be for the good. Okay, let's go back to number one. The Gemara is discussing, continuing a conversation that was talking about when to make a shechiyanu, when purchasing something that one already had. And it's a debate between two of the sages. And they're bringing various proofs. There's two different ways that two different versions of this argument, but the argument is between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. At some point, the Gemara says the following thing. The Gemara says that when these a Mishnah or a Brisa are defining a particular debate, there's often a question of, and what about in a case like that? Do they also debate that as well? And in that kind of narrow context, the Gemara says that it prefers to tell us the lenient view when it comes to this this debate, which happens to be that of Rabbi Meir, that you wouldn't need to make a blessing in a particular instance, as opposed to the view of Rabbi Yehuda that would be stringent. Why is that? The Gemara says, Kocha de Heter Adifle. It's preferable for this brisa to tell us a ruling that's more lenient rather than one that's stricter. The question is, why is that the case? So if we take a look at Rashi, to Rashi on another Gemara, he says the following. It's a Gemara on the first page, Beis Amud Beis of Beah, Gemara that talks about Yantif. Rashi says the following. I have the same quote, because this quote, Kocha de Hetera Adif, is quoted at least 9 times in the Talmud. So Rashi says, Tov lo lahashmi'enu koach divrei hamatir. The Brisa, the Mishnah, prefers to let us know the koach, the strength of the opinion that's more permissive, true somech al shmuaso, because that opinion more relies on a way of understanding. Ve'ena yar lahatir, and isn't fearful of permitting. In other words, if they're saying it's permitted and it's an established, recognized sage, it's because they've looked into it and they feel that it's permitted. And based on that research and knowledge and security in their opinion, they permit it. On the other hand, but the power or the strength of the opinion that forbids, Eino Raya, it's not a proof of their rightness of their opinion. Because everyone and anyone are able to be strict. Even if something is in fact permitted, let's say they didn't do the proper research or just don't know the answer, they can just say, don't have it, don't eat it, don't do it. In other words, if you come to somebody, you go to a rabbi, and you ask the rabbi a hard question, the rabbi doesn't know the answer. So if he permits you to, let's say it's a question of whether something is kosher or not, question of whether you could marry a certain person, if he doesn't know any better and he just permits you, it could turn out that you ate not kosher. You married somebody you're not allowed to marry. So the safer answer when you don't know is say, don't eat it, don't marry the person. It doesn't prove that the thing isn't kosher. It just proves that anybody could say, out of doubt, what do they say? Out of doubt, throw it out. Out of doubt, don't do it. But so while the Gemara's narrow quote is usually in the context of explaining the parameters of a given debate between the Tanaim, generally speaking, the way Rashi interprets it is perhaps a judicial philosophy of a Rav. Occasionally I'll speak to a Rav who I find to be very strict, and I'll say something like, are you aware, have you studied the Tshuvot of Rav Moshe Feinstein on this matter that you are telling people a strict ruling? And they'll say, no, I studied the Shulchan Aruch. And I'll say, let me tell you something. When people ask you a question, they're not looking for the answer in the Shulchan Aruch. They're looking for an answer of somebody who's went through the possibilities of a way of permitting something by a recognized authority like Rav Moshe, who, by the way, it's not that they're necessarily arguing on the Shulchan Aruch. They're interpreting. Often, Rav Moshe will interpret the Shulchan Aruch in a way that a Rav isn't really able to do, because that's the greatness of Rav Moshe. It's not that a lot of times people think the simple reading of Rav Moshe, the Shulchan Aruch says one thing, and Rav Moshe says another thing, and they're arguing. And that's sometimes true, but more often than not, the Shulchan Aruch says something that people think means something, and Rav Moshe explains that you didn't understand the Shulchan Aruch. They literally, because the Shulchan Aruch was over 500 years ago, so they're using an analogy that they think applies to a current situation, and they're wrong. Many people are wrong. So rather than just easily saying forbidden because you don't really understand it well, you need to have a posek that could understand it better, like Rav Moshe, and therefore be matir something, permit something that other people are afraid of permitting. So that's a judicial philosophy. It doesn't mean always permitting everything. It means knowing more, being a greater scholar allows you the permission to find what actually is allowed. So that's number one, something that any aspiring posek needs to take seriously. Again, it doesn't mean that they're always permissive. It means that when there is a valid halachic way that's acceptable, that some people are not aware of, just because other people are not learned and don't know that, Rav with a learned and moral authority is able to understand that and use that in the rulings. Who that Rav is, that's a whole nother question. We'll leave that for another time. That's number one. Now we go on to number two of this great Masechta, this amazing Gemara. this Daf Samach, this 60th Daf of Shas, technically 59th. The second teaching of the top 10 here, just misplaced my piece of paper. Just here it is. Got it. Okay. The second teaching is fear and anxiety and faith. Now, this is a little bit more complicated, and I suggest that people who are suffering for anxiety get the proper treatment and seek out therapy. Perhaps a therapist is in order, and this is not to take the place of professional help. Learning a little bit of what the Talmud has to say, but certainly might help somebody a little bit. What does the Talmud have to say on Daf Samach? It says the following. The Gemara, the context is the Mishnah that the Gemara is interpreting is talking about various prayers and blessings. So one of the things a person shouldn't do is if they're coming home and as they're entering into their city, they hear a wail, and the person shouldn't pray that let that wail not be from my home, because we say, it already happened. The calamity already happened, and either it was this person's home or it wasn't their home. The prayer isn't going to change what already happened. Now, in that context, the rabbis tell a teaching about Hillel, the great Hillel. He was coming into his town, and he hears a yell from his city. He couldn't tell which home it is. And he said, I'm confident that it's not coming from my home. And the rabbis said about him, there's a verse that says, Mishmur ra lo yira, nachol libo batach Hashem. Of bad news, the person does not fear. And somebody who's confident in God doesn't have anything to fear. When the Gemara interprets that you could read that from front to back and back to the front, and the point is the same. A person doesn't have to fear when they have faith in God. So the first concept we have, which again, maybe it's an exceptional person. It's not for every one of us, but it tells us about Hillel had this level of faith in God that was so strong that he didn't fear, that he knew that it wasn't in his home. Yeah, how did he know? I mean, the Gemara doesn't establish that this is something that everybody should know. It's just something that Hillel knew. But there are two analogies about anxiety that seem like they're more apropos for the average person to try to learn from. They both involve a teacher and a student. The first one involves Rabbi Yishmael and his student. Now, they were walking in the shuk. The shuk is known as the marketplace. So today, for example, in Jerusalem, we call it the shuk by Machane Yehuda. And at that time also, there was a shuk in Zion. There was the Jerusalem shuk of those days. I'm not sure exactly archaeologically which place is referring to, but it was a shuk in Zion. I wonder if Zion refers to what we call the sections within Jerusalem that are referred to as Zion, because the whole city is Zion, but it has some specific sections that have that specific designation. That's for another time. But as they're going, Rabbi Yishmael noticed that his student was very anxious. And he turned to his student, what, are you a sinner? And he wasn't accusing him of sinning. He was trying to teach him a lesson, because he said, sinners are afraid in Zion. There's actually a specific verse that refers to Zion. So it's like a play on their location and the verse. And the student tells his teacher back, what about the verse in Psalms that says, Ashrei Adam mefached Tamid, praiseworthy is the person who's constantly fearful. Rabbi Yishmael responded to his student and says that is referring to Torah study, meaning you should be concerned about forgetting your Torah if you are too lackadaisical about studying and reviewing. In other words, Torah isn't magic. You don't just study once in a while and it's just magic. Okay, now a second story. Here the student is named as Yehuda Bar Nasan, and he was following his teacher, Rav Hamnuna. Now, Yehuda Bar Nasan gave out a sigh, and hearing that, his teacher, Rav Hamnuna, says, "What, are you trying to bring bad things on yourself?" Because there's a verse that says, "For a sigh and the fear that I have has overtaken me, what I dreaded has come to me." In other words, anxiety can, if anything, kind of like that book, The Secret, the negative thoughts can actually maybe lead to something with negative consequences. That's what Rabbi Hamnuna seemed to tell this young man. The young man was ready with the same line from Psalm that the earlier story shared. What about the verse he said that says, "Asher adam fached tamid," praiseworthy is the person that's always worried or fearful? And Rav Nuna answered the same response. That's talking about Torah study. Yes, you should be concerned to study Torah rigorously and frequently, but that doesn't mean when you're walking on the street, you have to be anxious that something bad is going to happen. You're not gonna, you'll never find a shidduch, or you'll never get a job, whatever it is that people are anxious about. Like just walk on the street. You're with your teacher, you're walking, you're in the market, you're shopping, shop, walk, talk. Don't worry all the time. Don't be anxious all the time. Now, I know telling somebody who's anxious not to be anxious generally doesn't just work like that, but these are two teachers that both have students who follow them, literally follow in their footsteps. So they're teaching them this important lesson of this idea of having faith in God. So perhaps we can say that the rabbis believed in what eventually became known as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is there used to be a belief that if somebody had anxiety, that the anxiety is so deep rooted, you couldn't convince the person using logic or answer their fears with different scenarios of how it actually might play out differently, or even if it does play out in a way that they're anxious about, how would that still affect their anxiety or become something that they should definitely become worried about before it plays out like that. So this, again, I'm not necessarily explaining what cognitive behavioral therapy actually is, but in a very simplified version, a lot of people don't really believe that will help them because they believe anxiety is not really something that changing your thoughts will change your feeling. The cognitive behavioral therapy says changing your thoughts have an influence on your feeling, and if through a therapist guiding you and giving you different scenarios and changing your thoughts, it'll calm down your anxiety. It may not just fix you once and for all. You may need to go to therapy your whole life. You may need to learn the techniques, but it's a way that will have some effect on you to make you less anxious. So perhaps the Talmud is believing this, and one of the more powerful elements to include is the idea of having faith in God as well. Okay, that's number two. Now we go to number three, which is a very interesting, fascinating, and perplexing one of al tiftach peh l'satan, not to open one's mouth for the Satan. The Gemara says the following. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught in a brisa, if somebody goes into a bathhouse, he should say the following prayer. Now you have to understand, back then the bathhouses had a terrible track record of calamities, of the tubs that were probably made with a very thin lining to be able to be heated up, would would break and people would die. They'd die in the hot water that they'd fall into. They'd die in the crush of other people or other things. So there was a special prayer. May it be your will, God, that you spare me from this danger and its like, and nothing bad should happen to me, not because of, I'm skipping a little bit, but not because of a sin. And then it says, here's the bold underlined part. If something happens that will lead to the person's death, may it be an atonement for all my sins. So the guy's going to the bathhouse with a prayer that includes the possibility of his death in that experience, and it should be atonement for him. That's this prayer. Abaya says, don't say that. Lo lema inashafi. A person shouldn't say a prayer like that ends off with those type of words. Why not? Dolo liftach pume l'satan. Don't al tiftach be l'satan. That's a quote that's also quoted by Rosh Lakish as well, the name of Reb Yossi. Le'olam yiftach adam piv l'satan. Don't give the Satan an opening. And they bring another proof text to show that when you open up in a certain way, you talk a certain way, you end up manifesting that negativity. Now, this is a very interesting question, and I want to learn it as, let me see if I can find, I have notes here. I want to talk a little bit about the parameters of this fascinating concept. Okay, so I've got A, B, C, D, and E. Those are the following ways that I have to explain some of the significance and parameters of this. The simple meaning is that the Satan it has three jobs. The Satan has three jobs. One is the opposing side within you that instigates you to do something wrong. The second is the judging side that tries to judge against us and is a prosecuting angel. And then, God forbid, after a person's life ends, it is the angel of death. And then it, in turn, also is the one prosecuting us in the afterlife and saying in front of the Bedtime Shema, the heavenly court, what's wrong with us. So that's kind of a simplified version of what we're talking about when we say Satan. It also means the adversary, the opposer. So it's an opposer in the universe, in the spiritual realm. So the first way I'd like to learn it, and I think even though I'm going to say the Zohar, a lot of people get frightened by the Zohar, is the way the Zohar explains the role of God and Satan in the story of Eov. The story with Job is that God actually tells the Satan, have you seen anyone in the world like my servant Eov? He's a special person. And the Satan says, yeah, sure, he's a great guy. He has everything. He's got a wonderful family. He's got wonderful wealth. He's got a whole situation. He's got everything going for him. Why don't you let me have him? I won't kill him, but I'll do other things to him. And let's see if he continues to be such a loyal servant. And that's kind of the setup for the book of Eov. Now, the question is, according to the Zohar, what's the backstory of Eov? Now, we all know it's a book about suffering. That's the well-known simple version of it, and it's a powerful book in the Tanakh. But the Zohar and other midrashic sources have a very interesting take on the origins of what's going on. And the way they understand it is Eov may be a parallel to the children of Israel getting out of Egypt, going through the desert, getting to the Holy Land. And at that time, God needed a scapegoat. He needed to like preoccupy the Satan with someone to engage the Satan so that the Satan would be busy doing that, so he wouldn't be so carefully looking at Israel if they're worthy of getting out of Egypt and so on and so forth. So what God was actually doing is he was instigating the Satan. God was the tiftach peh. He was opening his mouth to Satan so that Satan could have something to do. He was challenging the Satan. It looks like the Satan set up the challenge, but God knew the Satan. God knew the Satan likes to challenge a person. So by God putting him in the direction, or even mentioning who Eob was and how special he was setting up the Satan. Based on that understanding, we could explain this Gemara very powerfully and say, Atiftach the Satan means the Satan is looking for an opportunity to challenge someone. Don't give him that opportunity. Words give him that opportunity. And by bringing him in and saying things that are his job, you're basically calling him. And be careful and don't do it. As the Zohar, in its elaborate teaching, talks about the exception to that rule, when God himself, to be able to save Klal Yisrael, turned Satan on Eov. It's a weird Zoharic medrash, but it kind of helps fit in and explain our Talmud. That's A. B is we know the Talmud says something that when a tzaddik makes a pronouncement, even if the pronouncement is on a condition, like he swears that if this person will do this thing, good, and if they don't do the thing, bad, and maybe puts like a negative thing on that person if they don't fulfill that condition. So often the bad thing will happen even if the condition is fulfilled, which means that there are times by putting something out there into the world, by verbalizing something, that even if nobody is worthy of that bad thing happening, we just want to be careful with our words. So it's kind of in that a continuum of that. That's B. C is, in general, we find earlier in Brachot that when you're praying, emphasize the positive, and when you're talking about the negative, don't go too deep into the negative, because by really talking about the negative, you end up embracing that possibility of the negative, and we don't want to do that. D is really, the Talmud has a lot to say about speech. So, for example, the opening few pages of Masechtas Psachim talk about why the Torah uses the word or, the Mishnah uses the word or, which means light, to describe night, and why it will often say asher enenu tahora, why it'll say about an animal that isn't pure, rather than tameh, rather than defiled, because it wants to use positive language. We also know, of course, there's curse words, there's what we call nivel peh. We also know there's lashon hara, rechilus, motzi shemra, various forms of slander, gossip, and libel that could literally cause great harm to people. So this is part of being careful with your words, being careful with language, and the Talmud is constantly telling us in different ways, in different contexts, to be careful with the words that we choose. And finally, E is that perhaps you can limit the extent of Tiftach Bel Satan, because it could be based on Ayin Hara. What is Ayin Hara? Ayin Hara is evil eye. So the evil eye, for example, is if you flaunt something and other people look at it and are jealous, they may look at you in a way that gives you an evil eye, which basically means they hate you for having something they don't have. And we believe that energetically it might cause you to feel the kind of spiritual hate that's being aimed at you. There are other things that are similar to that. For example, in ancient times, the Gemara talks about it, they wouldn't have pairs of drinks. So if you had a drink, you'd have one or three, not two or four, with exceptions, of course, when you're doing like a mitzvah, like the 4 cups of wine. And many of those things, for example, the Rambam doesn't really talk about them so much, because the belief is, it's not just that the Rambam was a rationalist. The Rambam was well aware of these Gemaras, but he believed, as others believe, that a lot of these things are only effective if you think they are. In other words, it's like psychosomatic things. There are things that your belief in them will affect your health, will affect your well-being. But if you don't believe in them, then they're not going to affect you. So in that case, I don't think the Rambam mentions the idea of al tiftach pe l'satan, because if you're not worried about this concept, it's not going to harm you. So that's the fifth way to kind of narrow the criteria, because some people won't even say their phone is dying because they don't like to use the word death. And I think that's a little bit unnecessary. You can say your phone is dying. It just means your phone is like, it really means your phone's battery is low. Disconnect soon, but it's just a simple way of saying that. So you don't have to be that cautious. But again, like we said earlier, the power of speech is important. So when you can be careful to use more positive things, even in a prayer, you could just say, and let nothing bad happen to me. You don't have to mention death, as the prayer did say and was rebuked by Abaya, who said, don't say a prayer like that. That was number 3. And it gets even more interesting. It's a great daf today. Number 4 is, what's better, a prayer or a doctor? So here is a prayer that was made, some people say by Rabbi Acha, when somebody would go to, the barber shop. They used to also be bloodletters. They would go and get benkus. They would get their blood drawn when they were not feeling well. So hanichlas lahakis dam omer, they say the following prayer when they're bloodletting: may it be your will that this work should be for healing, and I should be healed. God should heal me, because God is a faithful healer, and his healing is true. It's not really the right practice for people to go seek out medical treatment, but that's what they have become accustomed to. And again, it's Abaya who responds, don't say that. That prayer, that part of the prayer that says, it's not the proper thing to go to the doctor. Don't say that, because Rabbi Yishmael taught that there's a verse, and certainly, or heal, you should be healed. It's a redundant time to say it twice. It's talking about when you have to pay for a victim's medical expenses if you cause them harm. So, but we learn now, because it says it twice, is that it's not just somebody who's harmed, but anybody who's sick, the doctor has permission to heal. So why is there even a havamina? Why is there, according to Rabbi Acha or whoever it was that said this prayer, even a thought to say it's not the proper thing to go to a doctor? We're doing it anyway, but I shouldn't be, to feel guilty about going to a doctor. What's that about? So let's take a look at this. It could be, I'd say, is there's this concept that there was a book of refuah, there was a book of healing that had either medicine or magical charms of pretty much every illness, and it was hidden away, and the rabbis were okay with it being hidden away, because they saw that when it wasn't hidden away, people were no longer praying. Which is a very strange story. Why would they? We're not against medicine, but perhaps a simple understanding is that if there's a type of science or magic that denies God's existence, the rabbis are nervous about it. The second thing, B, the Torah does say at least twice that the illnesses that God put on each. It also says, Ki ani Hashem rofecha, I am God, your healer, your doctor. So in other words, simple reading of the verse, simple, would mean that we don't need to have a healer because God is our doctor. So that's the second way of why there might be a thought that we shouldn't have to go to doctors. And the third thing is that medicine was dangerous. Even today, sometimes medicine is harmful. A lot of people die when they're going through radiation treatment because the drug itself is so powerful. Of course, the alternative is that they'll probably, God forbid, also, God forbid, something bad could happen without the medicine. But back then, for sure, there were many people who died because of the medical care they received. They didn't have sanitary conditions and care because they didn't know about things like that. And so on, they didn't know a lot of things. So that could just be a simple thing. And last but not least, it could be that it's not that there's anything wrong with the doctor. It's just that God is the source of the healing. The doctor is just a vessel. Perhaps by diminishing the role of the doctor, it's not to literally not have a doctor, but it's to remember that the source of healing is God, and the doctor, don't worship the doctor as God. Worship God as God, and the doctor is his agent. So what is the verse for Apol Yirape, heal, you shall certainly heal? How is it responding to these different challenges to the healing art of the doctor? The first thing about the Sefer Refuah, the book of healing, is perhaps the problem with the book of healing is that it was a book of magic. And a doctor is not a magician. The book of magic may have been, like the Rambam says, certain things, other philosophies or practices that were part of a broader way of taking away people's faith in God and bringing them into some other practice, another belief. So perhaps that would be one argument that would see the book of Refuah in a similar vein, and also understand that it's important to have medicine that's part of science and that's part of God's world. B is the simple reading of the verse can be interpreted that not that God is your healer and you don't need to go to a doctor. God is the ultimate form of preventative medicine. So, in fact, I believe the Ramban says something to the effect of many of the mitzvot will keep you healthier and well. So if you practice a healthy lifestyle based on the Torah's way of living, you won't get very sick very often. So if you do get sick, then of course you have to go to the doctor. So that would be what it means in that context. And C is, yes, there are dangers in medicine. And I might think because of those dangers, just stay at home. And if you die from the illness, you die. But the Torah commands you, do the best you can. The doctor is the best you can. If that's all you have, try to get healed through a doctor, even though there's a risk there. Obviously, do the best research so that you have the best doctor, the best hospital. And finally, D is there's no need to insult the vessel, meaning if the doctor is the vessel, you don't insult the vessel. Just like the purpose of a mitzvah, the mitzvah is a vessel to do God's will. You don't insult the mitzvah just because it's God's will. It could be some people forget that God exists and all they're focused on is doing mitzvah, but you wouldn't want to start insulting mitzvah just because some people forget that God is behind it. And there's no need to insult a healer. A healer is doing God's will, which is to heal. He's an agent of God, and therefore there's no need to put down doctors. Okay, so those are 4 interesting ways of understanding the Havamina of what the issue is in just going to a doctor, and the Gemara's response of Apol Yirape, why it is required. Okay, so that was 4 for 4. That was 4 within that 4. And now we get into the number 5, which is Asher Yatzar. The Gemara continues, this is the following. On Samach Amid Beis. When a person leaves the bathroom after relieving themselves, they say the following: Baruch, the beginning of a bracha, Asher Yatzar Adam B'chachma, who has created a person with wisdom, Uvarav Nikavim Nikavim Chalalim Chalalim, and created within the openings and cavities It's revealed and known before your throne of glory. If one of them becomes ruptured, one of them becomes blocked, you can't stand before you. And what's the conclusion? So Rav says, you heal the sick. Shmuel says that why mention that everyone's sick? But Rofechol Basar, who heals all flesh, and Rav Sheshes adds in Mafli Lasot, and who acts wondrously, and Rav Papa says, say them both. Rofechol Basar Mafli Lasot, who heals all bodies and is wonderful in his actions. Now, I have to tell you that it's a gratitude prayer for something that people who are well often don't even think about. But when some people who are ill suffer from terrible constipation, even to the point where it's one of the worst things that could end people's lives, even in the cancer ward. That's sometimes a terrible way that some people are not able to survive. So obviously it's life and death for some people. For most of us, it's just a question of comfort and discomfort. But it's a very powerful prayer, even at its face value. But I want to talk about the opening of the prayer. You created a man, a person with wisdom. And there's a debate here between Rashi and Tosfos. And the question is, why are they debating something like this? Rashi says the following. In Divrei Hamasel Mafli La'asot, and the conclusion of it is you make wonders. So Rashi says there that it's just a wonder about the holes and the basically that the organs don't get deflated, that the holes don't close up, and so on and so forth. And then it says that God created the person with wisdom, and made all of these different cavities. And despite all of these cavities, the oxygen or air is within us, doesn't escape. This is a wonder and a wisdom. So basically, Rashi is saying that the conclusion of the prayer and the beginning of the prayer have the same structure, which is which is God created the human body, the biology of the human body, with wisdom, and it's truly wondrous. So that is Rashi. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's like praising God on the wondrous creation of the human body. Then Tosfos says the following. Tosfos argues on Rashi. He quotes a medrash from the Tanchuma and says that on the verse Vayivra Elokim et Adam, the verse in Genesis, it says, and God created Adam. Rabbi Bone, which we would say is Rabbi Avon, because they wouldn't put in the aleph, and like the Yerushalmi, don't put in alephs in somebody's names. So Rabbi Avon, or actually Rabbi Bone, says Bechachma shehiskin mizonotav. What does it mean that God created a person he created him with wisdom because he prepared his livelihood for him. And then he created him. Like it says in Sanhedrin, that why was it that after the last thing that God creates, the sixth day of creation, other than the other things that were created, Ben Hashmashot, is Adam and Eve? Why did he create everything else beforehand? And the answer is that when Shabbos comes in, there should be the Shabbos Suda should be prepared, should be ready. In other words, the whole world is there prepared for Adam and Eve to partake in. So the question then is, that's a very nice medrash. What is it doing here? What does it have to do with a prayer for a successful trip to the bathroom to tell us that God made a whole plan? And I think the answer is, why exactly is this so important, this prayer? And the answer is that a person is a primate, biologically speaking, we're very similar to apes and chimpanzees. And a person could say, okay, we're just another animal. And a lot of people, biologists, would say, yeah, that's absolutely true. And a lot of children who study science on a second grade level are like, yeah, we're animals. And they wouldn't be wrong on a certain level. And that's what Tosfos is telling us. Yes, we have the same processes in our biology for extracting waste. That's true. But it's not just because we're the same as an ape. It's we come last, so to speak, after those things. The biology is still within us, but we're with that and more, so that the world could be created for our benefit to rise to be above just an ape. So that's what Tosfos is explaining, according to my understanding, is that it's including the fact that our bodies are very similar to other animals, but not because we're just another animal. On the contrary, just like that Medrash is teaching us, so that whatever benefits the animal kingdom benefits us as well. Plus, we have the leisure time to create civilization and do things that humans do. We also have to be careful. We have a big responsibility of the Ulashama. We have to serve and guard the world as well, which we often don't do. That's number 5. Let's go to number 6. The number 6 is Shema by the bed at night. And Hanichnas Lishan al Mitaso. Somebody who goes to sleep in his bed should say Shema Yisrael, just the first paragraph, till V'hayam Shema. Now the question is, you'll remember that in the beginning of the first page of Brachot, there was also already a debate between Rashi and Tosfos about what's the main Shema that we say to fulfill our obligation for the evening Shema, the biblical evening B'Shafcha of Kamecha, when you lie down to recite the Shema. Is it the Shema that we say as part of Ma'ariv, the evening service, or is it the Shema that we say lying down? So here it's coming back to be discussed. So here it says specifically that you only say the first paragraph, which would be a question. If that's the main biblical obligation, why would you only say the first paragraph? And in fact, the commentators say that it's a way of fulfilling your obligation biblically in case you didn't daven Ma'ariv, or you daven Ma'ariv early, and by saying the Shema now, and if you did daven early, you could say the whole Shema. Or if you forgot to say the Shema because you didn't daven Ma'ariv, but that way you could, in theory, fulfill your biblical obligation to recite the evening Shema in Kriya Shema Shel Hamita, the Shema by the bed. And in addition to the Shema, you say the following. You say the bracha, Baruch Hashem. Hamapil chavlei shena al einai snuma al afapa. God that causes the bonds of sleep upon my eyes and slumber in my eyelids. Meir li'ishin bat ayin, who illuminates the pupil of my eye. Yiratzon b'fanecha Hashem Elokai shetashkiveni l'shalom be'ir. Well, God, my God, that I go lie down in peace. Give me a portion in your Torah, and make it a custom for me to do good deeds, and not the opposite, to do averot, and not to bring me to do a wrongdoing or sin or a test or embarrass. And let the good inclination rule on me, over me, and not the Yitzhara, and save me from every evil mishap and illness. And let not bad dreams and bad thoughts disturb me, and may my bed be complete before you, and let my eyes be lit up in your Torah. Perhaps I may die in my sleep. Now again, why would you say something where we just said before not to al tiftach b'el satan? Could be that we're not actually referring to death, we're referring to sleep, which is a little bit of death. Blessed is the God who illuminates the whole world with his glory. Okay. Now, just to give you a little understanding of the evening Shema here in context, various teachers, including the Arizal, say that when you go to sleep at night, you're not just reciting the Ikrei Hadas, the most important beliefs of Judaism, like the Shema, but you're also doing a form of tshuva, of you're doing a mini death. You're letting go of your soul to some extent. Some part of your soul is leaving you while you sleep. So you need to do tshuva for that day. And there are other prayers for forgiveness, that you forgive others and that you accept anything that would happen to you should be a forgiveness for any sin you've done. That the Arizal's students, many people till today who are the students of the Arizal's way of Nusach, include in their prayer. And this brings me to why many of these things on the Daf are really interconnected. One of the things we talked about is fear, anxiety, and faith. We also talked about Al Tiftach Bel Satan. And this is connected to this idea of being able to work on one's soul. So it's giving you this work to do. Part of the goal of Yiddishkeit is to allow a person the maturity of dealing with their issues, not just sweeping them under the rug, but rather trying to forgive people, trying to do tshuva. And I'll just tell you one of the beautiful things I learned in yeshiva about what to do during the time that you're saying the Kriya Shema Shel Amita is a cheshbon hanefesh. Cheshbon hanefesh means a soul accounting of your day, to think about what your day was like. And this is a little technique I sometimes use, which is I play a movie of the day backwards, starting from then, going back to the morning. And it just helps me kind of see where I am in the world and what I need to work on. So that's one of the practices of cheshbon hanefesh, a particular way of cheshbon hanefesh. That's all part of returning your soul when you go to sleep. That's part of the evening Shema. So that is number 6. Number 7, really, there's a relationship between 5 and 7, because 5 was Asher Yatzar, and 6 and 7, I'm sorry, is a Lakana Shamash Nusata Bidahari, the soul that you put into me is pure. And they're supposed to be said one after the other, because the Gemara mentions earlier that it's bracha, smucha, l'chavrita. Those two prayers are connected, so the second one follows the first. That's why you don't introduce l'kai neshama with baruch ata, because it's relying on the baruch ata of the ashrayot. So the question is, why does the Gemara intersperse the Shema in the bedtime between the ashrayot and the Elokei Neshama, the soul that you've put in me, is pure prayer? It should have said them in the right order. And the answer is very simple, and this is a deeper answer as well. But the simple answer is, we were already talking about being watching us and guarding us, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we're already talking about guarding, and just like going to the bathroom was similar to like going to a doctor to let blood, or going to a bathhouse that was dangerous. So, and going to sleep also, there's an element of anxiety there. So I'm looking at all of these Gemaras as dealing with helping us and not just not being anxious, but being grateful for things that would ordinarily make people anxious. So gratitude is the answer to anxiety, like being thankful for being able to go to the bathroom, being thankful, being aware of the power of sleep to regenerate our souls, and being aware of our responsibility in the process to safeguard our souls, and that God will safeguard our souls. So that's why there's and the bathroom. So that's all related. So that's why right after the bathroom, he talks about going to sleep, and then he reintroduces what really should come afterwards, which is Elokai Neshama Shenasat to be Tahorahi, the prayer for the purity of the soul. Rabbi Soloveitchik suggests the reason why those two go together is because the Asher Yatzar is on the body, for the physical body, and Elokai Neshama is for the soul. So first you talk about the body, then you talk about the soul. The Arizal suggests something else, which is first you talk about Chachma, that the creation of the body in a way has an antecedence in the divine wisdom, even more than the soul, shockingly so, that counterintuitively. And then the Bina, the understanding, is more about the Neshama. So it's Chachma, Bina, and that's where they always are set together. So let's see what this prayer actually is. And this is what it says about the about Elokai Neshama Shenasat to be Tahorahi. When you wake up, you say Elokai Neshama Shenasat to be Tahorahi. The soul that you gave me is pure. Ati Yitzhar to be, you fashion it within me. Ata Nefach to be, you breathe it into me. Ata Mishamar B'Kebi, you guard it within me. You eventually will take it from me and bring it back to me in the future. As long as the soul is in me, I acknowledge and give thanks to you. Hashem God, the God of my forebears. Master of all worlds, Lord of all souls. Blessed are you, Hashem, who restores the souls into corpses. Okay, so let's take a look here at what this means according to the Arizal. We don't want to do too much Kabbalah here because there's a lot of Kabbalah on this page, and I'm purposely trying to avoid it. But this one I just can't help myself because it's such a almost clear correspondence to the Kabbalah in this prayer. Okay, so here's how it goes. There's a neshama, which is, according to the Arizal, the third level of soul. Nefesh is the lower level of soul. Ruach is the second, and neshama is the third. So he says we don't all get to work through that level of soul. We don't get to actualize that necessarily, but we all have a connection to at least part of the neshama of Adam Arishon, because he included everybody within him. And we say Tahorahi, pure, that corresponds to the world of Atzilut. That's the neshama. The neshama Ata Barata corresponds to the regular neshama, the world of Bria. Ati Yitzarta is the level of Yitzira, the ruach of Yitzira, and Ata Nefachta, you blew it within me. That's the nefesh of Asiya. So, and then when you say the neshama shenasat be, when you kind of when you start out with that, you're referring to the way that all four levels of the soul are interconnected. They're all interlinked. So this is a beautiful prayer to basically say, my soul came from the world of Atzilut to the world of Bria to the world of Yitzhak to the world of Asiya, and they're all within me. I have potential. For example, we say that the world of Atzilut is the world of Chachma, the world of Bria is the world of Bina. So Chachma is like true leadership, like a Rebbe. Bina is a Talmud Chacham. The world of Yitzira is the world of prayer, and the world of Asiya is the world of mitzvot. Like people who are just doing the right thing. They don't have to feel it or understand it; they're just doing it. So that's a little bit about number 7, Elokai Neshama Shenasat to be Tahorahi. Now we do number 8. The Gemara continues. Great Gemara about Birchas HaShachar, the morning blessings that we say. Used to be said at home. Now some people say it in shul. We're going to talk about that as well. When a person hears the sound of a tarnigola, a rooster, they should say Baruch. When it says Baruch, the Gemara generally means Baruch Atah Hashem. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and depending on the context. Asher nasan l'sechvi vina lahavchin ben yom ben layla, who gives either a rooster or the heart understanding to distinguish between night and day. Okay. When you open up your eyes, you make the pokeach ivrim, who opens up the eyes of the blind. When you straighten up, you say matir asurim, who releases the bound. When you put on your clothing, you say malbish arumim, who clothes the naked. When you stand up, you say zokef kfufim, who straightens the bent. When you stand on the ground, I don't know how he was standing out without standing on the ground, but I guess it's possible. He says, Roke ha'aretz al-mayim, who spreads the earth upon the water. When you walk, you say, Hamechem etzadegaver, who firms a person's steps. When you put on your shoes, you say, Sha'asali kol tzarki, he makes all of my needs. When you put on your belt, you say, Oze Yisrael b'gvura, who girds Israel with strength. When you put on something on your head, like a turban or a hat, you say, Oter Yisrael b'tifara, who crowns Israel with splendor. And then the bracha on, the full bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu lehisatef b'tzitzis, unwrapping ourselves in tzitzis, and then we get about putting on tefillin, which will be number 9. So, question is like this: let's say you slept in your clothes. You fell asleep. You didn't even take off your belt. You didn't even take off your shoes. So, do you make all of those brachot? What about if you don't have a rooster in your neighborhood? Do you make hanos and l'sachli vina l'havchin ben yom u'v'nala? What about all of those things? So it seems that the custom became that even for many, not for all, that if you, even if you didn't put on your clothes because you slept in your clothes, even if you didn't wear shoes or whatever it is, you make all of these blessings. The question is why. They seem to be similar to Birchas HaNenen. Birchas HaNenen is a blessing when you benefit from something. I don't make a bracha on eating apple because some people in some other place eat apples. I make a bracha because I'm eating an apple. So the simple answer is that no, this bracha isn't about you. This is a bracha about people in the world. People in the world, even if somebody's blind, they make a blessing on Pokeach Ivrim because there are other people who see. Perhaps because other people see, they could benefit even blind people. And perhaps you, having slept in your clothes, didn't, you should have taken off your clothes, put on pajamas and changed into new fresh clothes, but you're just grateful that there is fresh clothes when you will need them, even though you didn't use them today. And it seems that the Arizal rules in accordance with that understanding. It's just a machlokas of which way to do it. Do you need to experience these things to make the brachot or not necessarily? And it really was bothering me. Why does the Arizal, amongst others, rule that you can make these brachot even if you didn't actually experience them? And I think the answer is as follows. According to the Arizal, one of the things we do when we get ready to pray is we also say that I accept upon myself the mitzvah to love my neighbor as myself, which means the following. According to the Arizal, the level that a person is supposed to be at that would allow us to make a bracha for one another is that we really feel for other people. We care about whether other people are suffering. We care about other people's happiness. We care about their clothing. We care about their belt. We care about them. We're concerned when they're sad, and we're happy when they're happy. if we are on that level, then it makes sense that we're not just making a bracha simply on our own things. We're making a bracha on our own things and on the things that other people are benefiting from at the same time. Better, they should both be done so that we have our personal experience as well as the communal. But even if you're not doing one of these things, your connection, your deep-rooted empathy that we need all to work on is the point of the bracha. And that's why this is a continuum of the Hamapil, where we forgive everybody. If you go to sleep and you forgive people before you go to sleep, when you wake up, you feel for them, and you'll make a bracha with compassion for those who have, even if you don't have. So I bless everybody that we should have more empathy and more love for one another, so that even if we do the bracha the way that many people do it, even if they don't have that particular thing, it's because the simcha, the joy that other people have, it also gives us a sense of benefit as well. That's number 8. Number 9 is the bracha on the head tefillin. Or do we make a bracha on the head tefillin? Here's what the Gemara says. When you put on tefillin of the arm, you say Baruch Asher, the same thing, the full bracha. Asher kiddushanu b'sosav b'tzivanu laniach tefillin, that you have commanded us to put on tefillin. When you put on your head tefillin, you say the same Baruch Atah Hashem, the full intro with Asher kiddushanu b'sosav b'tzivanu al mitzvah tefillin, for the mitzvah, the commandment. It commanded us to the commandment of tefillin. Now, when do we say both brachot? So there's really a machlokas, the Gaonim, and already brought down in the Gemara on Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says the following. I'll quote Rashi within the Tosfos. Because there's a Gemara that elaborates on this a little bit more. So that if you don't talk in between the putting on the hand tefillin and the head tefillin, you only make one bracha, and it covers both. You make the bracha laniach tefillin when you're beginning to put on the tefillin on the hand, and then you're covered. But if you're interrupted by speaking, then you make a second bracha al mitzvah tefillin. And Rabbeinu Tam, who's actually Rashi's grandson, he doesn't agree with his grandfather, and he says that can't be, because the shalrosh, the head tefillin, is like a primary mitzvah. It's got 4 separate chambers as opposed to the hand tefillin, which only has 1 chamber. It's got the shin on it. So it's got to be that al mitzvah tefillin is always made a second. You always make a second bracha on the head tefillin. And if you talk in between, you have to make 3 brachot: laniach tefillin on the hand, another laniach tefillin on the head, and al mitzvah tefillin on the head. So how do we paskin today? So it seems like the Sfardim and the Hasidim, those who follow the Kabbalists, rule like Rashi, and the Ramah, and not everyone who's Ashkenaz, but many people who are Ashkenaz, rule that you make both brachot, even if you don't interrupt by speaking. You make al mitzvah tefillin on the head tefillin. But many of them have the custom to say after the second bracha, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam Vad, which is what you say in case you did make a bracha levatala, bracha in vain. Since there are major opinions that you shouldn't make the second bracha, they say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Olam Vad. Question is, why would you even think to make a second bracha? Because the truth is, they're 2 different mitzvot. So in theory, a lot of people don't know this. We always do it together. But if you were somewhere and you didn't have the hand film. You put on the head film without them, or vice versa. So that's why it would make sense on one level to make two brachot. The reason why you would say one covers the other is because they're similar in nature. So it's not like they're two separate mitzvahs that have nothing to do with one another. They're two separate mitzvahs that are totally connected. One's to the hand, one's to the head. So that's a little bit about the debate. We're going to go to number 10, which is a very difficult one, which is the Gemara continues and says the following. We're talking about brachot. You make Tova Hametiv on good news, Shachiyanu, good news shared is Tova Hametiv, good news on your own, Shachiyanu. What about bad things that happen? So the Gemara says something as follows. That just like you make a bracha on a good thing, you also make a bracha on a bad thing. Gemara says, what do you mean? We know you make a tova hametiv on a good thing, but you don't make a tova hametiv on a bad thing that is good and does good. We know that a bad thing, the Mishnah tells us, you make dayan ha'emet, you make a blessing to the true judge. So Rava says, the statement is only to teach you to accept the bad thing with a sense of joy or happiness. That's a very disturbing Gemara. I don't understand the Gemara. But thank God for Rashi. Rashi says something very interesting. Rashi says, what does it mean to receive the bad thing with joy? He says, Levarech amidas peranias b'lev of shalom. To make a blessing, this dayan ha'emes, the true judge, on the attribute of misfortune or judgment with a whole heart. In other words, Rashi is limiting the scope of this joy. It's not that a bad thing happens to you and you're just happy, go lucky. It's like nothing bad happened and the terrible news, the worst thing happens and you're just happy like the best thing happened. That's not how Rashi learns the Gemara. Rashi says when you make a bracha, you make a bracha with a full heart. Now, question is like that's an even weirder thing in a way. I can understand crazy thing. People want to be happy all the time. Doesn't matter what happens. I don't agree. I don't think it's natural. But okay, that's what people want to do. But to say that you can be sad when something bad happens, but for one moment when you make a bracha, you should have a whole heart. What does that even mean? So I think the answer can be found in the next Gemara. This continuation of this, actually. It's based on this Gemara. The Gemara brings a bunch of proof texts, which, by the way, very much support Rashi, because they say that basically you bless God for different things, good things, bad things. So it's not that you have to be infinitely happy when bad things happen. It's that there's a moment where you have to accept that we don't understand what's going on. Maybe some good will come out of it. Maybe there's a bigger plan. God still loves me, even though I don't know why this happened. And I make a bracha. And for that moment, I am able to make a bracha. Beyond the bracha, sad. According to the way Rashi understands the Gemara, you can be sad. Again, there could be other people that don't agree with Rashi, but that's the way I see Rashi. It's pretty clear in the Rashi. But then it tells us the story of Rabbi Akiva. And it says, it was taught in the name of Rabbi Akiva, a person should be regularly saying, Kol da'avad Rahman al-Tav, whatever God does is for the best. And the story is he was traveling and he got to a certain city. He wanted to stay over and they didn't let him in. He said, we're sold out. He said, whatever God does is for the best. He slept outside in the field and all he had was a rooster, a donkey, and a lantern. A wind came and blew out the lantern. A cat came and ate the rooster. It sounds like Haggadah. A lion came and ate the donkey. And each time he would say, God does, he does for the best. And that night, an army came, captured the city, led everybody into captivity or killed them. And then it was clear that everything got it, all those bad things that happened to Rabbi Akiva were actually for the best. Now, why is Rabbi Akiva connected to this teaching? And the answer is as follows. Rabbi Akiva always sees God in everything. So much so that even if there's a murderer, and according to the Torah, you put the murderer to death, Rabbi Akiva says, I would never have put anybody to death. I would have find a way. And the Ishbitzer explains what is it with Rabbi Akiva that even Moshe would do, put them to death, and Rabbi Akiva wouldn't. And he explains the following: that the way Moshe saw the world is he's judging. He's able to judge people that at this moment, this person is acting outside of God's will and has to be punished for. Rabbi Akiva saw the world in a way that everything is coming from God. He wasn't able to separate a human being from what's happening from God. Based on that, Rabbi Akiva always said, let's wait and see that really God is behind it, so we'll see how ultimately it's for the good. That's why he was even able to give up his life. Now, how does this answer our question of why you could have a moment? Rabbi Akiva is teaching us something. We're not all on the level of Rabbi Akiva, but for one moment in every bad thing, if we could make a bracha, if we could bring God awareness into the possibility to be with God in the bad thing, even for one moment, then it's worth it. Thank you, and may we have more simcha in our life.